It's ad break time. I'm proud to announce that the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. 500-year-old Vampire, Jason Cox's cooperative role-playing game, is now shipping, and you should grab your copy if you haven't already. On top of that, there is new crowdfunding campaign on the horizon. In mid-January 2025, look out for Keep the Faith, a role-playing game about building a religion on BackerKit. The designer is Greg Loring Albright, who also designed Ahoy, and I'm very proud to say that I am at work on the curriculum guide, so I'm extra excited about this one. Also, if you want to support the podcast, please visit patreon.com/beyondsolitaire and help me keep the lights on. But for now, let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week on the pod, I'm very happy to invite my special guest, game designer, very prolific game designer, Clarence Simpson. How you doing today, Clarence?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I thought I'd invite you on because I feel like your design life has exploded in the last couple years, and I want to get the story about how we got there. Um,
Yeah,
so for people who don't know you, why don't you just kind of plug a couple of games that you want them to go track down?
sure. So the game I'm probably the most well known for is a co-design with Ashwin Kamath, the Wolves from Pandasaurus Games that came out in 2022. Also done Merchants of Magic, Chomp, and A Message from the Stars are the other kind of games I have released recently.
Excellent. And I noticed you've got a lot in the chamber, which is very good. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm very interested, in how people start designing and then how they end up with a lot of different game designs. And I
hmm
feel like you're a perfect case for that. So, you got into designing because you joined a design group.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say my design tendencies were even there since childhood, right? Like, but it's like, I remember in being in middle school and like making this little pen and paper dungeon crawl thing where I was drawing all the items and monsters and all this kind of stuff, right? Um, but I didn't know what to do with that or whatever. And even later as an adult, the first time that it really made me think about doing design was like 2009 when the Game Crafter. I remember seeing Game Crafter ad in Board Game Geek, and I was like really into that for maybe a year, and then I still like didn't know what to do with the stuff I made, and then put it aside until like 2019 when I was at a random local con and met somebody who was in my local design group, the Game Designers of North Carolina, and they were running like a playtest table and giving out prizes to people. But there were, people there, and I talked to them, and I'm like, I realized these people actually have games that are out there on store shelves, and they're just right here in my hometown, and they meet every single week to play test each other's games and stuff. And I'm like, maybe this is something I can do then, since they're right here. I had no idea that existed at all, and yeah, so that was like my first kind of uh, inroads to becoming a game designer.
Yeah, it's actually funny you should say that because I did not start designing until much later, but I did start a YouTube channel while I was in North Carolina. Um, in 2014,
Yeah.
around kind of that same there must have been something in the water because I was playing at Atomic Empire. I remember going to a playtest day and thinking it was really interesting. And actually, there's an event at like the Science Museum,
Hmm.
you know what I'm talking about? And,
No, I
like,
have no idea about
there was,
this.
like, a game event one night, and I just went with my boyfriend for fun, and Daniel Solis was there selling, like, Belle of the Ball and, like, his
Yeah.
toy pawn game,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
that I now see in his designs later, right? But it was his self-published stuff, and I just
Right.
remember it really stuck with me, like, how nice and enthusiastic he was,
Mhm.
and I don't know what impact it had later, but it must have been something because I still remember it so clearly.
Yeah.
So, how did you get started with your design group? Did you have to, like, show up with something, or did you, like, play test other people's stuff a little bit first and then jump
Well,
in?
yeah, I mean, at first, I had no idea what to expect. I met them at this local con, and they were telling me a lot about it, but I still didn't really know what was going on with it, or whatever. So I just, showed up at a meeting and was play testing things for I don't know, I guess a couple weeks before I started putting something out there myself. Um, and yeah, then I started bringing some of my own designs shortly after that, and after that I had most weeks I would say I had something uh, that either was new, or I'm working on new iteration of something I've already been working on, every week that they were meeting.
That's awesome. What would you say I mean, would you I know a lot of people work in solitude, but what would you say that having a group has done for you as a designer and as somebody who's iterating?
Oh, I mean, it's been absolutely huge for me. I give a lot of credit to the game designers of North Carolina for kind of the trajectory of my design career. Um, it's I think there's a couple factors there. First, for having regular meetings with other designers, I think that's really helpful for a new designers, and b new designs even from experienced designers, because one thing about showing stuff to other designers versus showing it to like the general public or whatever is designers are really good at seeing through the mess, right? Like this ugly handwritten stuff that you've putting over there, and no graphic design, everything is just kind of a mess, and you're not really sure what to do with it. And designers are really good at like seeing the potential of what something could be, right? Because they deal with that kind of stuff all the time, and they're really good about knowing the industry in general, right? So they'll know if a game, oh, this looks too similar. There's something already like that was a huge hit last year, and then you immediately know, well, maybe you shouldn't work on that, or you should do something different to make it stand out. And those kind of things I think are really helpful. From being able to show your prototypes and stuff to a design group. The other part of it, I would say, is just that kind of uh, regular accountability and deadlines in a sense. I can't tell
Yeah.
you how many times that I've been motivated to go and make something and update a prototype because oh gosh, I've got a design meeting tomorrow. I don't want to like waste that time and show up with nothing. So that constantly motivates me to make something new to bring to these meetings.
I like that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I joke about it, but it's true that David Thompson and I get through our work together by just setting meetings. At the end
Yeah,
of every meeting, we just set another meeting, and then if you have enough meetings, things magically get done.
yeah, deadlines are magical.
Whew. Indeed. Yeah, I definitely notice that some of the stuff that I work on my own that I'll just get to, like, I just don't ever do enough with it.
Right.
I need, like, a self meeting. I really liked what you said about, like, seeing through the mess.
Yeah.
So, I think that we tell people, "Just get your feet wet. Just make something.
Mhm.
Just try and see what
Mhm.
happens." But, like, how messy exactly is that? Or was that for you in your early prototypes? Because I feel like people hear that advice, but they
Mhm.
don't actually know, like, how ugly it can be, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's yeah, that's very true. I mean, honestly, the latest thing that I worked on, uh, that I just first play test that I put in front of people a couple weeks ago, it was just blank cards that I had scribbled some words on, you know, and so no icons, no art, no nothing, and that was kind of the first play test of that. Um, So yeah, that's something I'll still do from time to time. Honestly, most of my prototypes, even by the time they get signed by a publisher, are still really rough. There's never illustrations. There's usually barely any color. It's like usually just black text and some placeholder icons in certain places, just on white background. So yeah, that stuff to me doesn't ever have to be really fancy at all.
Yeah, I'm actually in your camp on that. I think it's really cool to hear you say that. I think in a world especially where we hear about like, "Oh, your prototype has to look really nice."
Hmm.
Oh, what about using AI art to make prototypes look better? Like, have you ever really felt that you won or lost the day in terms of pitching your game because of the attractiveness of your prototype?
Right. No, I mean, not personally. I've it's weird because I've definitely heard stories from people who think that like the attractiveness of their prototype may have made a difference, and like design has only become more and more accessible and more easy to pitch, like with publishers taking online pitches, and that just means the volume of pitches out there makes it a little bit harder to stand out. So um, I think there is a maybe a baseline of professionalism to your look that can help, but I, I also think making things look too good can be a problem as well. I've definitely heard of people who, when they see something that looks really, really good on the table, they think, "Oh, this is an artist who's trying to make a game, right? Who doesn't really know game design or whatever," and they're, putting all of their effort into how it looks versus how it plays. There's kind of that danger, I think, with making
Yeah.
things look too good when you're pitching. So, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your?
Yeah, actually, what's
Yeah,
really funny about that is I have heard, I'm not gonna name any names, but I've actually heard that comment of like, "Oh, look, this person's clearly an artist trying to make a game," or like, "Oh, this is
yeah,
definitely an art first game."
right, right.
Oh man. One big exception that I'm just gonna shout out, I've had him on the channel, is Pablo Clark's Old King's Crown. Pablo's a
Mm,
fantastic artist, but
mhm.
damn, that is one hell of a game.
Yeah. I
So
mean, yeah, it's not always true and it's not fair, but it's something to just be aware of.
yeah, that's funny. Mechanically, how raw are you willing to go in terms of what you're willing to show people? Like, I think the other thing is that it's so hard to start on a game design because it's obviously a full thing doesn't spring out of your head like
Yeah.
Athena from the Skull of Zeus, right? So, like, at what level of game does something have to be before you consider it testable and like worth showing to other people?
Right. I mean, so my design group is open enough to where we'll do stuff where there's not even a game yet, right? Like we've had people come and lay out like a board or some components or some interesting cards, and they're like, how can let's brainstorm for a little bit. What's the game here? These are interesting components or whatever. And so that happened like with Daniel Solis that you mentioned earlier. He had made this deck called a mirror deck, where it was like numbers 1 to 100 on each card, but each card also, if you flipped it upside down, became the reversed number. So like a 91 would become a 19, a 67 would become a 76 if you flipped it upside down. And that actually, you can get all 100 numbers onto a 54 card deck if you do it that way, which is pretty cool in itself.
Yeah.
And so he brought that because he thought it was a cool deck idea, but he didn't have a game for it. And what ended up happening actually was Mark McGee, who's one of our other members here, really liked the idea, ran with it, and came up with a game that ended up getting kickstarted, published under his own publishing company. He published it himself. Um, I guess it actually just fulfilled the Kickstarter this year, called Tether. So he and got some amazing art to go with it as well. But yeah, so that was something where there was no game at the beginning, and it eventually became something later. But I'll also say for myself, I think what I've been willing to show has shifted a little bit. Like I'm comfortable putting something that's not even a game in front of my group if I really feel like I need to do that. But I think I'm at the point where I'm experienced enough where I filter out a lot of stuff myself in my head, right? Like I've got all kinds of ideas all the time, and I most of them I think are just not good enough to pursue, right? Or I've got a prototype I'm working on. I don't feel like it's good enough to put in front of somebody yet, because I think there's still more work that I can do on it just by myself, right? Because that way, and this kind of goes into getting a lot of stuff out there and being prolific or whatever. To me, it's because I try not to waste that time that I have with the design group. Um, because if I put something in front of my design group and realize 5 minutes into it that like, oh man, this is a disaster, then I feel like I've wasted that week for playtesting and stuff. So I try to do more of, playing stuff at home if I can, just by myself. I tell people I do like probably over half of my design work in my head while I'm driving around, right? Just thinking about my designs and imagining how turns might go in my head, and like so much stuff gets filtered out through doing that rather than just throwing it in front of my design group and having them tell me immediately, yeah, this sucks.
That's really interesting. It also sounds like collectively your group has like got a real brain trust now as y'all have
Hmm.
grown in experience. It makes me wonder like how open is your group to new people? And then how does that part work? Like how do you handle like everybody's needs?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely open to new people. I mean, we've had new people at almost probably every meeting in the past several months, um, which is great. And a lot of people only just come once and realize it's not for them or whatever, and that's fine. But it's something where we always try to get everybody's stuff play tested if we can. Um, Sometimes there will be things prioritized, like if somebody's about to have a pitch meeting or about to go show stuff at a con or whatever, then we'll prioritize those games above anything else. Or if somebody we didn't get to their game last week, we'll put them on a priority list to make sure that they get their stuff tested the next time. But there's no like other than that, there's not any sort of prioritizing, you know, new members versus 10-year members or anything like that. We do have, I would say, like to your part about the brain trust and everything. I would say we do have a lot of really experienced, published designers in our group overall. Um, I would say more than most design groups that I'm aware of. Other people have said that as well. So I do think that that helps us a lot, having that kind of knowledge and experience just sitting there in the group available to all of us.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you get a lot out of being in a game group by presenting your game. It sounds amazing, actually. I'm kind of like want to do this now. But but also, how do you be a good contributor in a group like that? Because it has to be like a mutual support to
Hmm.
fully function. So, like, what does it mean to be a good tester if you ever join a group like this and a good comment giver?
Sure. I mean, I think, yeah, being a good tester, that's a whole topic to itself, right? I think you always want to give honest feedback for starters, right? Because going to be there's always going to be designers who have their little baby passion project that they've shown to all their family and friends, and they love it because they love the designer, right? And then they put it in front of a design group, and you immediately realize, oh, this is like using 1990s era design mentalities, and this won't fly in the modern market or whatever. And if that's what their goal is to get it published in the modern market, then they need to know that, right? And so some of those things are like tough lessons to learn, and hard to say, but do it in grace and kindness and constructively and everything like that. And I think all that stuff is really helpful for new designers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, when did you decide to make the jump that you were actually going to pitch something and try to get it published? Like, how long did you have stuff in the pot before you decided it was ready to serve?
Right. So I would say, I mean, the first time I started pitching, so I started in early 2019, and I had never been to any of the major cons before. But I decided to go to PAX Unplugged in December of that year, and that was when I decided that I would maybe try and pitch something. At that time, I had um, it was called Yield Magic Shop at the time. What was Merchants of Magic Shop? Merchants of Magic, and it was doing pretty well. Like I was getting a lot of positive feedback from my playtest and everything. And then by that time, I had tested it probably, I don't know, 20 or 30 times, going through a bunch of iterations and things. And I felt like it was getting close to pitchable. And then but I wasn't sure, right? And so what I decided to do was around that time, the tabletop mentorship program was running one of their first sessions, and I decided I would try and sign up for that to try and be mentored about pitching and publishers and cons and everything like that because I had never interacted with that part of the industry at all. I just at that point I had been just insulated to making designs and showing off to my local other designers. Um, so I ended up getting into that program and getting mentored by Rob Newton, who's out in Seattle. Um, and he had a published game and he had done some pitching and stuff. And he actually uh, coincidentally came to North Carolina one time during our mentorship, played my game, and he was like, "Yeah, you should pitch this." And that was like the impetus for me to finally be like, "Yeah, okay, if this guy who's published and has pitched to publishers and done this kind of stuff thinks that I should pitch it, then I guess I should pitch it." And so that's really the thing that kind of got me moving towards pitching it at PAX Unplugged, and doing the sell sheets and researching publishers and sending out emails and all that stuff.
Oof, it's a lot of stuff.
It can be
So
for sure.
so basically you found a mentor to help you
Hmm.
like through that process the first time. Have you started mentoring yourself yet, or do you not feel ready yet? Because
Oh, so it's funny. I did that. So I know the people who run the mentorship program, and one of their things uh, when they were recruiting like mentees and mentors, one of the things they were making clear to everybody was uh, if you know something now that you didn't know when you started, then you're qualified to be a mentor, right? Like that was always this kind of can I be a mentor? Am I good enough to be am I experienced enough to be a mentor? And with that kind of push, I was like, okay, I'll do it. So actually, in that exact same session where I was being mentored by Rob, I was also a mentor to I think two other people at the time. One of them was Ashwin, my co-designer on the Wolves, because he at that point had he was really passionate, had lots of ideas, but had never actually made a functional prototype. Which by that time, uh, I had already made several of those, and I knew at least kind of that part of it. So even though I'd never been published, never pitched, never been to a con, there were things that I knew that I could share to help somebody else. And so I did that then, and ever since then, I think I've done maybe 6 sessions or something like that where I've mentored people through the program. To me, that program is one of the crown jewels of the game design community.
that is absolutely fantastic. That's excellent. And then when it comes to pitching at cons, do you think that especially now that online pitches and stuff are such a thing, do you think that cons are necessary or highly beneficial to make it as a game designer, or is that something that is incident like it's optional?
I mean, I would definitely say it's beneficial. I don't think it's necessary in the way that it used to be pre-COVID, um, but definitely beneficial. There are still publishers who will only take pitches at cons. Um, so that's if you don't go to cons, you just won't ever get anything signed with them. And uh, even apart from that kind of restriction, I think there's a human element to it as well, right? Like when you're pitching your game, you're not just pitching your game, you're also pitching yourself, right? You're pitching yourself as somebody the publisher might want to work with. And there have been times where during a pitch, the publisher didn't want my game, and they've told me that, but they're like, hey, but we like your design mentality. You're obviously professional about this, and if you got anything else, here's my card. Send me an email, right? Like then now you've got a direct connection to somebody instead of going through like a random web form or something like that. That kind of stuff happens all the time. So getting that um, inside info, um, I think is a little bit easier in person than online. Still happens online, but there are definitely benefits to going in person and pitching, I think.
Interesting. How many projects do you tend to have going at once? Because I feel like you have a lot of like I'm just amazed by like the output of the last couple of years. Like I feel so, we signed Night, which is like a year ago. So we're just hanging out and like we're waiting on art from Tool, so I ain't gonna cry about it. But like, is this something where you had a whole bunch of games that you were making over a long period of time and just sold a bunch of them,
N
or like how does this pipeline get going?
no, honestly, I don't work on a ton of games at a time. Like, I would say, like, actively working on stuff, maybe, like, 3 at the most at a time. Usually what'll happen is, as I'm working on something, I get to a point where I realize, um, that the game is pitchable, and usually that's down to a couple things. First, the game doesn't feel like it's broken anymore. Most of my early playtests will feel broken in some way. Like I have some kind of design goals and it's just not accomplishing those goals. Eventually, it doesn't feel broken anymore. And uh, but importantly, like it's when you show it to designers, especially, you'll always get feedback. Designers are notorious for having ideas, right? And so even if a game is good enough to be published right now, designers will tell you, "Oh, I would add this, I would do this, I would drop this, whatever." Right? Like they're always going to have ideas, and the thing that took me some time to learn is that eventually you got to ignore that stuff, right? Um, because at some point you're not making the game better, you're just making it different. You're making it appeal to one audience more and to another audience less, right? And so once I realize I'm at that point, then I'm like, okay, this game is pitchable. And so I'll make a sell sheet or whatever, start putting together some emails, a list of potential publishers, and then I'm not going to work on that anymore, right? And then I move on to the next project. And sometimes it takes years before that first project actually gets signed. And so it's just kind of in my list of things that I can pitch, but not that I'm actually working on. Because the other part of it is, if you're the type of designer who is trying to license games to publishers, is that you're generally not making a final product at all, right? The publisher is always going to put their fingerprints on it and tweak little things and everything. So doing that like last minute, 5% polish kind of stuff, it can be wasted effort because the publishers, depending on the publisher that you give it to, they're going to do something different for their particular audience.
Oh, it's really interesting you bring that up because it makes me wonder now. So, to what extent, like, I mean, what kind of say do you have in the development of your game once you've signed it? Do you like to have a lot of say? Are you kind of cool with just like letting the developers do their thing? Is
Hmm.
it different per publisher? What are some reasonable expectations in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's definitely different per publisher. Like my first design, Merchants of Magic, that was, with a very small publisher, kind of a one man shop for the most part. Um, and the development of that was very collaborative. It was like, me and the main publisher guy talking through things on Slack, just having all these design discussions, saying, "Hey, let's try this," and we kind of go separately and test it with our separate groups, come back together, say how things went, what worked, what didn't, all that kind of stuff. So I was involved heavily like the whole way, and I liked that for my first game. Since then, I've also been maybe a little bit less involved in my games. Um, Part of it is because I have more things going on, right? Like I'm trying to um, be involved in more projects at once, so I have less kind of brain space to devote to just one. So I'm more inclined to let developers kind of do their thing at this point. But I still really like being involved in the process. I like being told as decisions are made, especially about like, graphic design stuff or whatever. Um, so that I can give my feedback on reasons why this is great or won't work. You know, Having that input is something I definitely prefer to have, but doing the kind of heavy iteration of playtesting stuff a lot after it's been signed is I'm less interested in, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
But
no, it does.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like everybody's a little different. It's always interesting to like hear like that personal
yeah,
spread of preferences. So you decided to join a game group. You put yourself out there and did a mentorship program to help you
hmm
put yourself out there more to go to publishers. One of the other reasons I wanted to talk to you is, you've been doing something that I actually don't have the guts to do at all, which is like put your game into awards contest.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when did you do your first contest? And like how much of a part of your, I guess, design life is entering contests, and what if, I kind of want to get the lay of the land and then see what else I want to ask.
Sure. I mean, I did a lot of design contests early on, and very few these days. Part of that is because I see design contests as kind of a gateway for newer designers, right? Like I think it helped me a lot early on, and I'll get to the details of that in a minute. But so now I feel a little weird entering contests because I'm at the point now where I have connections. I can start a pitch email with, "Hi, I'm the designer of the Wolves," right? And that means something to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I generally don't do them these days unless there's something really compelling about that to me. But so to backtrack a little bit, when I started with the design contest, I actually did it. My first one, it was in actually I think it was just a few months after I started designing, and so my design group had talked about the Haba USA design contest, which at the time was an annual contest where Haba would send you would you would pay for it. It'd be like $5 or something like that. And they would send you this bag of random wooden Haba bits from all their Haba games. And the contest was to design a game that used at least three of those bits in that bag, which I thought was just like a fascinating thing. Um, and like the restrictions like that are really the kind of thing that pushes me to do designs to have this like really tight constraint that I wouldn't normally design in. Um, so that was like a really compelling challenge to me. And we also had some designers in the group who had done the contest before and enjoyed it. And like Julio Nazario was one of the designers who actually won the previous year's Hobby USA design contest. So I thought he could have some, good insight into that as well. So I decided to do that and made my game Shaking the Tree, which was like a gridless path builder, if that makes any sense, where you lay out these tiles on the board, kind of free form to make this network of paths stretching across the table to try and collect these little frog meeples that came in that Haba kit, um, which I thought was a pretty interesting idea, and then ended up winning first place in the Hobby USA design contest. Um, and that was kind of my first validation of like, oh, maybe I do actually know what I'm doing with design. Maybe I'm not like totally crazy with my ideas here. Um, and that also gave me that first kind of like um, intro line I could put in my pitch emails and stuff like that. I'm no longer am I just I'm a game designer. I'm a game designer and winner of the Hobby USA design contest or whatever. And like that has some meaning. I like to think anyway.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and it's funny though because like so that game was the second game I ever designed. Won first place in that design contest. I actually entered it into the Cardboard Edison contest the year after that, and it was a runner-up for the Cardboard Edison award. And it is my white whale. I've never been able to sign it. I've never found a publisher for it. Uh, and yeah, so if I don't know if that sounds interesting to any publishers listening, get in touch.
Oh man. So I feel like I feel like it takes a certain amount of nerve to like put yourself up for an award. Is that something that you struggled with at all, or did you just decide, you know what, screw it, I'm just gonna do it?
We're talking about the Diana Jones thing
And
now.
actually, we are gonna
Oh,
get there, but I meant
okay.
the even just those earlier awards. Like that's
Oh,
so
yeah,
cool.
just the design contest stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I so it wasn't something I really struggled with so much. I didn't, especially for some of them. Like, I didn't think of them necessarily as something I was gonna try to win Well, I mean, obviously I wanted to win, but it wasn't going to be something that I would consider a failure if I didn't win, right? Because
Yeah.
part of that is the um for a lot of these contests, you'll get feedback on your design from like industry professionals, right? And to me, that's reward enough for doing it, even if I didn't get anywhere into the contest. Which there were times that happened. Like I entered the cardboard Edison again and didn't get anywhere with it. Didn't get into the finalists or anything. But I'd still got feedback from other publishers and designers that were judges for the contest. And to me, that alone is worth it, right? Like it's putting your stuff in front of other people and getting a professional industry insider opinion on it.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to ask too, you get feedback from these awards,
Hmm.
and it sounds like you did find the feedback worthwhile. But what kind of feedback can you expect if you submit your game to something like this, and how can it be used?
Right. I mean, it's not going to be tons of feedback, right? Like because usually these judges are looking at a lot of games, so they'll give you, a sentence, maybe a paragraph at most, um, about, and each one does it a little bit differently. Some of them will be like is talking about how unique it is in the market, or just typical like what did you like, what did you not like, kind of stuff. Um, but like with Cardboard Edison and another one I did, the board game workshop, you'd get a pretty good number. I want to say like 5 to 10 maybe bits of feedback, just all at one time from people. Which I mean, to me, just getting that amount of feedback at one time was worth it, right? And um, even if it's just little small bits of feedback, just getting that many different people looking at your game, right? Because if you're in a game design group, the same people are looking at your game constantly, and you start to know like what they like, what their tendencies are, and their feedback can become kind of less valuable in
Hmm.
certain instances, right? And yeah, so getting that feedback from kind of other people is definitely worth it, I think.
How do you deal with harsh feedback? Are you good at that? I am not. I just have to,
Yeah,
like, accept that about myself and get through it anyway.
right. I don't know. I mean, I think I'm fine with it now. Earlier on, it was tougher, right? Especially like first game comes out and you start to get the BGG ratings and comments and stuff like that. That can be tough too. But I think as long as the thing that always has propped me up is having enough kind of positive feedback, right? Like so the games that I've entered into contests, usually I've had enough positive feedback where I know that at least somebody out there likes this. And I have to know that not every game is for everybody, right? And that's fine. And I have to know that also, when publishers are giving feedback, them saying no doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad game. It could just mean this isn't a fit for them, or for their audience, or that they don't know how to market it, or any number of things that doesn't mean it's a bad game.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to look at it. Alright, and since we kind of foreshadowed it already, you had a big win this year. You were a recipient of the Diana Jones Award for Excellence in Gaming, which I think is so cool. Um, and I wanted to ask you, I guess, about that process as well, because one thing that's kind of interesting about Diana Jones is that it's like, oh, you can nominate yourself, or you can nominate other people, and you seemed like a little bit anxious to tell me like that you'd just gone ahead and nominated yourself, but I actually think that's badass. So so what was that process like? And
Yeah.
how was your
Well,
experience with it?
okay, so let me clarify first. I did not win the Diana Jones Award. Okay, so that's a
Okay.
separate thing that was won by the Paizo United Workers or something like that.
Oh, okay. So it's
So
the emerging designer program winner.
yes, the Emerging Designer
I gotcha.
Program. They're very careful. Like, don't call yourself a Diana Jones Award winner. You're a Diana Jones Emerging Designer. So
It
anyway, so
still
for
says winner on here, I'm just gonna say.
yeah, okay, that's fair. I'm a winner. I'm just not an award winner. Um, Now I've forgotten the question. You were asking.
Yeah, I wanna know, like, kinda what led you to put yourself up for it and what that process was like.
Yeah, I mean, so it was something where, the emerging designer program, it's designed to kind of like amplify the voices of underrepresented designers and kind of give them some help in getting their design career going. So it's especially intended for people. I think the restriction was like your first you have to have a published game, but your first published game had to be less than 3 years ago. So you have to be pretty new in the industry for that. And so for me this year, with Merchants of Magic coming out in 2021, this was my last year that I would be eligible for it. Um, and uh, and as far as like for the underrepresented part of it, I'm half Filipino, right? So that's something I don't necessarily talk about a lot, but I know like that would, I guess, or I assumed that would qualify me for that. Even though that one was something I also had questions about, like I don't really talk about a lot. I don't know how obvious that even is. It's easy to look at me and just think maybe I'm just a random white guy or whatever. But and the other part of it that gave me some hesitation was that I'm also at a point in my career now where I have made a pretty good number of connections in the industry, right? Like there's publishers that I know will look at anything that I show them. There's um, I have enough games kind of under my name that I can introduce myself as the designer of the wolves, or other things that have meaning and make things much easier for me. And so there was definitely a part of me that thought, man, I don't know if I should do this. I feel like this should be uh given to somebody else who needs that leg up more than
Yeah.
me. um and so I was like really really waffling on putting myself up for that, and ended up talking with some other designer friends, and one of them said something that stuck with me, which was basically that the Diana Jones Award, or Emerging Designer Program, has a committee that's going to decide who wins this, and they know what they want. They know what kind of person they want to win this. Don't take yourself out of the running. Let them decide for you. And I was like, okay, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. They know who they want to give this to, so I'll just say, here's what I am. Fill out the application, tell my story of what I've done and everything, and let them decide if that's not the type of person they want or if it is. And it turns out, I guess, that I'm the type of person they wanted.
Excellent. Yeah, I actually, you know what? That's a really good outlook. The not taking yourself out of the running, like you might as
Right.
well throw your hat in. I think that's a really good approach. So it sounds like you feel that kind of throwing your hat in the ring for various awards with varying degrees of success has been a good experience for you as an emergent
Yeah, yeah,
designer.
I would definitely say so. I mean, that the Diana Jones thing, especially, that was um, basically, got me a free trip to Gen Con, which I don't know that I would have done otherwise. Um, and these other design contests have got opened other doors for me, right? Um, so yeah, yeah, I would say that they've definitely been worthwhile. Again, it's something that I don't do as much anymore. Again, because I feel like I've made these connections, and that a lot of the contests are more for, I see them as for the benefit of newer designers. But yeah, for the newer designers out there, I'd definitely say go for them.
Excellent, excellent. And then, it's kind of fun. So I feel like I'm watching a real time transition between, newer designer to like experienced designer. Like, at what point I was a teacher before I went to work for a leader, and it's like, well, at what point are you considered a veteran teacher? Like, at what point are you considered not new anymore?
Right.
And like, I don't actually know where that line is. Like, do you feel like that moves for you depending on the
It's
day?
it's yeah, it's hard. Like I a lot of times I still think of myself as a new designer, and like one time recently I was like, "No, you've been doing this for 5 years, right? Like you've got more experience than a lot of these other people, right?" I mean, obviously there's always people that have more than me as well, but um yeah, it's weird. I'm starting to, I think, transition in my head away from thinking myself as a newer designer, and more of a I don't know, whatever you would call it, like this current second generation of uh, cohort of designers, right? That's trying to help mentor some of the current generation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, it's weird though.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in a weird position because I'm new to design, but
Hmm.
I've been around a long time.
Yeah.
But, it's like, well, I don't know how you even label that anymore.
Right.
So, one of the other reasons I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you in particular is that you're very open, about how your game career has gone. So, I
Hmm.
believe it's on Blue Sky, I saw a thread where you actually talked about your income year to
I
year
did.
and your
Yeah.
experience of, like, publishing games.
Yep.
And I thought that was really fascinating because I thought that was very I feel like a lot of people are shy of doing that.
Yeah.
So, what made you decide to, like, put yourself out there? And I actually think it's super useful, but I also think that most people don't have the guts to do it. So,
Yeah. That's totally
what drove
fair.
it?
For me, it was actually the designer Matthew Dunstan. He, for the past couple years, has done basically exactly what I did. He uh, goes through his kind of finances of here's all the games I signed, here's the royalties. I think he even had like pie charts and everything because he's got a lot more games out, right? Um, but he had done that, and uh, he at this point he's a full time designer, right? So he's showing kind of what is necessary to do that, and um, there's not a lot of people doing that, like financial sharing at all. But I also hadn't ever seen anybody who's doing that or who had shared from like you know, a few steps behind full time, right? Like this is something that you're still doing on the side. You're not making enough to feed a family of four or anything like that, right? And so that was kind of my decision to just put this out there. And I've got kind of enough games under my belt where maybe it's not super obvious what everything's coming from, right? Like I feel a little weird about saying how much I'm getting from specific publishers and specific contracts, but showing this kind of like overall um, status of the finances felt better and easier to share,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's still just your personal information instead of
Right.
everybody's business. Yeah.
Right. Right.
That's fair. And so you also mentioned, this is not yet your full-time job, although who
Mhm.
who knows what the future holds. I know that you worked in video games. Is that still what
Yeah.
you do for your day job?
A little bit of that. So video game and video game adjacent stuff. Most of my career has been like software development in video games, but I've also done a good bit of video game adjacent stuff, like making interactive exhibits for museums, kiosks, and stuff like that, touchscreen kiosks and things that use video game technology. Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that I've generally done for my day job.
That's awesome. Do you think that the things that you learned in that job about the video game industry, I guess about making exhibits that work and are appealing, etc., um, translated well into your board game work, or do you see them as separate?
Um, I think there's a little bit of overlap, but there's a lot separate, right? Like you can get away with a lot in video games because the computer does so much work for you, right? One thing you learn pretty quickly in designing a board game is like every system or that you add to a board game is something new that players have to learn, that they have to remember, that they have to you know upkeep and think about constantly. So you're occupying more and more mental space where that's really not a big deal in a video game at all. um so yeah, there's a lot of things that I think are very unique to tabletop games uh, that you don't have to think about in video games. I enjoy doing the tabletop game design much more. Actually, it's a much more pure form of design, I'd say.
Interesting. All right. Before I go into just a couple softy questions, do you have any kind of last advice for people who are emergent designers, as the term appears to be, or people who's trying to get started?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just kind of reiterate what we've kind of already talked about. One
Yeah,
is, you know, find a design group if you can. Even if you don't have one in your hometown, there's design groups that are online and meet on Discord and stuff like that, and those can all be great. Um, and get your game in front of designers. And then if you're a little bit farther on in your career, my next piece of advice is stop putting your game in front of designers because I kind of mentioned this before, but at some point uh, it's not always beneficial. This is the lesson that took me a little bit longer to learn is that uh, at some point, designers are usually heavy into the industry. They play a ton of games, and they're these like core hobby gamer audience, and that's not always the audience for your game. It might be, but if you're making something light or casual, that you might be hope to have in Target one day or something like that, there's a good chance they're not your audience. And then you want to put your game in front of people who are more just gamers and not designers in general.
that makes a lot of sense, actually. All right, so we spent a lot of time talking about games. What are some games you've been playing recently that bring you joy?
Oh my goodness. I don't get to play games as much as I used to. Let me think.
Never seen. I'm kidding.
Yeah, so for recent games, like at Gen Con, I was able to play Flip 7, which is like this really simple push your luck game. So you got like cards 1 to 12, and there's one copy of the one, there's 12 copies of the 12, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you can take as many cards as you want. Each card is worth the number of points on the card. But if you ever get the same card twice, then you bust and lose everything. So the 12s are worth the most, but they're also the most likely to bust.
Ooh.
So that's kind of a neat little thing I've played recently. And then I also played Zoo Vadis recently, which I'd never played that or the original Quo Vadis. Um, and that one was really fascinating to me about how it's like a pure negotiation game in the sense that like to succeed in the game, you you must have people help you, and you're free to like backstab and not be helpful and go back on your word and stuff like that. But the game is set up in such a way where if you do that, like everybody else can lock you out of victory, right? So there's this kind of there's this forced cooperation, even though it's a competitive game. There's this forced cooperation to it that is just like it was super fascinating to me when I played it.
That sounds fun, actually. Yeah, we had a
Yeah,
game night at the office, and other people were playing Zivadis, and now I wish I had been in on that game.
yeah.
But I did get station fallen that night, so that was really good.
Okay.
And then if people want to follow your work online, kind of ask questions, get in touch, where can you be found?
Sure. Yeah, I'm currently on Twitter and Blue Sky at Stoic Hamster.
I like
That's
it.
probably the best place for me.
Fantastic. And I, of course, if you're listening, everybody, am Beyond Solitaire everywhere online, and I'm terminally online, so I'm easy to catch. Clarence, thank you so much for coming on and having this really nice hour with me. I really appreciated your insights, and I really hope that they help somebody else out there.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody out there, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.